Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Foresight Radio Podcast, where we speak with industry leaders and innovators who are taking steps to make the senior living industry better. Our goal is to disrupt the industry and leave it better than we found it. Now on with the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Foresight Radio. I am your host, Rachel Hill, and this is going to be a good one. I hope you are not listening to this hungry as I am right now, because this guest, we're going to talk all about food. And I am so excited to have him on the show. Please welcome from Trestle Hospitality Concepts, Aaron Fish. Hello.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to chat.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Yes, me too. I love all things food. I know you love all things food. And one of the other things I love what you're doing is you are elevating the dining experience, and you come from a hospitality background. So I am super excited to dive into that. And, for anyone in our audience who kind of doesn't know how you got into this or what your background in hospitality is, I would love for you to break that down for us and share a little bit, please.
Yeah. So I have a degree in hospitality management from Kansas State University. And when I was doing that, my career goal was hotel general manager, right? I had worked for some really high-end resorts and hotels, and I just thought, man, that's what I want to do. I want to be a part of that. And so I worked in the hotel industry for probably the first 7 or 8 years of my career. And then life kind of threw me a curveball, and I love telling this story. I got into senior living by accident. It was, I got engaged, and it was a long distance relationship at the time. She had just recently moved and taken a job. And so my now wife was like, you should probably move closer. And so I took a job as a dining room manager at a large continuing care retirement community, solely with the idea of, hey, this is a temporary thing, get back on track with my hotel background and become that general manager. And when I got in, I was lucky enough to, really bond with the COO at the CCRC. And she had a new vision, a new direction for how the food service operation there was going to be. And she wanted somebody to bring an elevated experience to what they were doing. They had just come from contract management, had a very institutional approach. And so, right place, right time. I wind up over the course of the next 12 months after having started there, going from dining room manager to director of this enormous campus. So it was a little bit of drinking from the fire hose, if you will, learning senior living.
Yes.
But what I found was it's not that what we do in food and hospitality for senior living isn't that much different than running a hotel. And so the more I got into it, the more I realized, hey, I see an opportunity here to bring what I do in that part of the sector of senior living. And so I've been doing that now for almost 20 years and working in food and hospitality for a number of different organizations in regional and corporate director and VP roles until this year when I started Trestle Hospitality Concepts to kind of bring my background and experience to the industry as a whole. The thinking was I could either do it for a single operator and influence the lives of 2,000, 3,000 residents, or I can provide kind of what I do and what I've done in my experience and support operators and do it for 25 or 35,000 or even more. So the goal was, how can we get out into the industry? How can we support smaller operators who maybe can't bring on a high-level VP in their corporate office, provide support for those smaller operators so they can do what they want to do when it comes to the space.
I love that concept of sort of helping out the quote unquote little guy, right? Like who wants to do big things and dream big. And I think that's like one of our fundamentals here at Senior Living Foresight is we want to dream big for the industry. So first I want to say I love that concept. And then I want to back up a little bit because you said something really interesting, which is that, your hospitality background and what you were doing really wasn't that different than what you were seeing or having to do in the senior living space. And I think, for the average bear, for someone outside of the industry like me, you're not really gonna see how those two worlds align. So I'd love for you to sort of break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah. So, when I got into senior living, the institutional model was there, right? There were a lot of people who were taking things that they were doing in hospitals and healthcare because they looked at senior living as healthcare, right? And we do a ton of healthcare, right? We know that assisted living, skilled nursing, there's a lot of healthcare involved, and it's a very important part of what we do. But when you think about the majority of the people in communities, they get that service 2, 3, 4 hours a day, right? What are we doing the other 20 hours a day to support them with food, with nutrition, with engagement activities? So it's a very broad thing. And that's where kind of thinking like, what do they do in the hospitality industry to support this? You think about the concierge at a resort. Well, it's kind of like the combination of an activities resident engagement director and the front desk people at a community. We're supporting, we're helping, we're answering questions. Meals are 3 times a day. There's snacks, there's all of this social engagement that happens. And so kind of bringing that mindset of service, I always tell people, this is an industry of people serving, right? And we can't miss that. And so if we bring that hospitality mindset to what we do, not only is it going to be great for the residents, but there's such a huge opportunity for operators. They look at their bottom line, how they market and brand themselves using that. I think it's really important to really kind of push forward that concept and that notion.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting because I want to talk a little bit about sort of the experience. Like Steve makes this great point, right? Like likely you're eating the same thing roughly every day, right? Like we fall into our own sort of patterns. Maybe sometimes it's a rut, but basically like
Yeah.
we're right, like we're eating the same things. But to that point though, even if, for example, you just want dinner once or twice a week to be kind of a special thing, I still don't think that means that your typical dining experience, whether it's an omelet, eggs, your oatmeal, has to be sort of this lackluster event, so to speak, even though it is just part of your routine. So I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts on that and kind of how you sort of approach that I find really interesting.
Yeah. And I think what you say is really important, right? Like, I think a lot of times people in our industry look at food service and we talk about creating a dining experience, and everybody goes to this like white tablecloth, like button down service. And I don't think that's entirely accurate. There are definitely operators and communities, some seniors that move into places have that expectation, but that's not how we eat, right? Like you said, like we get into this routine of we do certain things and we eat a certain way. And so when you think about bringing that concept of hospitality and serving people, you don't necessarily have to do everything 5 star from a presentation standpoint. But I think it's important to think about 5 star service and food as how you put it out, right? Like it could be, you could just be serving hot dogs and chips, maybe. That's a very basic meal, but it's how you present it, it's how you prepare it. Like, are you giving them options? Thinking about how all of those things come together, I think can really enhance and improve a program. And I think that's really where people need to focus. I think, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago with somebody. 5 star service is 5 star to the person you're providing it to. And that's what's important. It's understanding what that resident wants, what that group of residents want. And so knowing that what is popular in rural Oklahoma is definitely different than what's going to be popular in, say, Orlando, Florida, or Seattle, Washington. So, it's understanding that and kind of customizing and tailoring it that way. And I think a lot of times that's just gets lost because there's so many other things.
Yeah, 100%. I love what you said there as far as talking about, I mean, we're talking about a backyard barbecue food, right? Like some hot dogs, but again, I think it's how it's presented. Like, what's the quality? Let's start there. What kind of bun are you serving? Like, I think there's ways to make it more of an experience than sort of just plopping something down on a plate, right?
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah, so I love that. And I want to talk about, I obviously want to talk a little bit about Trestle hospitality concepts and kind of where you guys sort of start ingraining that idea into the people that you work with and what kind of services you offer and sort of that whole I I hate the word holistic, but like just a full picture of what it
Right.
looks like to serve your residents, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of where this all came about, right? I didn't want to be shoehorned into one owner operator's way of thinking, right? Everybody I've worked for, they've all been great people and I've appreciated the opportunity. But what I always felt like I came up against was I had some ideas and things I wanted to do things, and there was always one or two missing pieces. Never get them over the finish line, right? And so what I want to do with Trestle is be able to go to an operator and say, I can help you in these different ways. Like, what are your pain points? How can I help you find your pain points? And then let's dive in and work on those, right? It's, it's a matter of understanding what you're trying to accomplish, and then bringing that said holistic approach to problem solving, and then tackling it that way. So, we can provide services as narrow as helping you find training materials and audits and things of that nature, all the way to providing kind of fractional VP, consulting director services of, hey, you need to build a program or you want to tune your program. Let's take it apart piece by piece. Let's do a longer project and say, all right, here's the markets, here's what your residents are telling you, and really digging in and building that from the ground up. So we can do a number of different things to kind of support operators when it comes to their food and their hospitality.
Yeah, that's incredible. And what I love though about part of your process is what you just said, which was listening to what your residents want and need. And I'm wondering if that's probably one of the biggest maybe puzzle pieces you see that are missing. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that. And then sort of, you talk a lot about these pain points that, operators are seeing. And I guess what are those and where are they, I guess, trying to go with addressing those problems,
Yeah, no, a couple of great questions. I think from the feedback standpoint, one of the things I always ran into was the feedback that we tend to get comes from these kind of big bulk surveys that operators do, which are great, right? Like, you get tons of information, tons of feedback, but that's when you look at like a bigger picture. Yeah, you can kind of retool programming around that. But when it comes to food and hospitality, it's a very personal experience and it's a very in the moment experience. And so not getting immediate feedback or teaching and training and coaching your teams to take that feedback they get immediately and then adjusting into what they're doing can really put you behind the eight ball. If just think about when you go to a restaurant, right? If you have a bad experience, you're going to say something and they typically fix it on the spot for you, right? Like, oh, I'm so sorry. Let me do something different. Let's tweak that, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
The whole purpose of that is so that way when you leave with the 5-star, 4-star rating versus a 2 or a 1. And so for senior living, I don't think that we look at it that way because they're going to come back for the next meal. So it's okay to get the feedback and look at it 6 or 7 days later. At least that's the mindset, because then we can tweak and change it. It really needs to be in the moment. And so ways to get feedback and make immediate changes, I think that's a huge opportunity. So I think that's the area of feedback that I think a lot of operators can really dive into, really improve their programs with. In regards to some of the pain points, right? Some of them are obvious ones, right? We hear about staffing concerns. I know that it's starting to get a little bit better, but I just did a presentation this week at a conference where I talked about, the struggle isn't necessarily that there aren't people out there willing to work. It's that we're not looking for the right people. Then when we get them, we refuse to invest in them. So I have this whole process I walk people through, but it really is all about like creating the right message to hire. Don't just fill the position with a warm body. Find somebody that's going to fit your culture, fit your need, and then continuously invest in them from a training, learning perspective, right? You may have people that come work for you that want to be an executive chef someday. Well, there are absolutely a number of ways in senior living you can be an executive chef that is one at a restaurant, but we've got to present it and prepare it that way, make sure that we're doing that. Food cost obviously is another one.
Yeah.
Just recently, the National Restaurant Association put out their updated numbers, and we're at a 15.1% year-to-date cost of goods increase in food. Yeah, and so a lot of operators are looking like, how can we do that? How can we combat that number? And when you pair that with an industry number of 18 to 20% food waste, I mean, you're talking about that's 40% of your food budget right now. That's You're just losing. It doesn't go to a resident in any way, shape, or form. So figuring out how to
Yeah.
deep dive into what you're purchasing, how you build your menus, even when we talk about kitchen design, right? Like, are you designing your kitchens in a way that maximize food costs, staffing costs? All of those things come into play. And I think, having someone who comes with a more hospitality minded background, like team here at Trestle will, is important. You can bring somebody in, but if they don't think in those ways of basically, I'm running a restaurant, not thinking about it that way, if they're not looking at it that way, you know, you're gonna miss some efficiencies and some opportunities in how you.
I agree with you 1,000%. And I'm wondering, based on that kind of last point you said about the hospitality space, I am wondering, are you seeing a trend in sort of recruiting people to work in the kitchen in senior living that have a hospitality background? And I guess second part of that, if not, I think it goes back to kind of what you were saying about the messaging. How do we let them know that, like, this is actually a cool opportunity where for a lot of growth, and they can do a lot of good here, if not more so than in a 5-star resort hotel, right?
Yeah. No, one of the things that I did prior to starting Trestle when I was an operator was I didn't always throw the resume away if all their background was institutional and senior living, because there's, depending on what they did. But I was a very big proponent of, I want to bring people from the outside, because I know my background and how it translated so well and so easily. And I talk to operators all the time about, you need to go and hire and look for people in the places where they do food well, right? And
Mm,
there are, I do start to see some trends towards that way. It's more kind of at the higher levels. You think about like corporate regional teams, or maybe like the executive chef or the food and beverage director in a community. More of those individuals are coming from hospitality. Um, you know, Work-life balance becomes a huge component of that.
yeah.
Anybody who's worked in a restaurant knows. I mean, you're going to be up, you're going to be there late, you're going to work long hours, you're behind, and so the biggest part of the messaging is telling and convincing these people that hospitality in senior living is exactly what you're doing. That no, you're not going to be putting like big batches of things out. It's not a big catering event. We want you creating dishes, building things, doing what you do as a culinary professional, as a hospitality professional, every day for our seniors. And the market is going to start demanding that as we get into more uh, baby boomers in our communities. Their expectation is going to be that versus kind of what's currently going on in a lot of. So
yeah, and I think that's one really important thing to note is that the demographic shift and the quote unquote silver tsunami, right? And what sort of the expectations of your residents are going to be. And that actually makes me think about what you said about building a menu. I'm so curious about almost a way, like I love hacking things, right? Like how can I work more efficiently and get twice as much done with half the effort, right? Don't tell Steve, don't listen to this episode. All right. um but I want to hack things. So I'm so curious, you've got budget restraints, you've got a staffing crisis, and you're supposed to still deliver good quality food and meals. Like that's a lot to juggle when building a menu. So I'd love for you to break that down for us.
Yeah. So from my perspective, menu development, there's two pieces of the puzzle, right? I restaurants are a for-profit business, right? And that's the reason I always refer to that as a model to look at, especially menu development is key, right? We do have some restrictions in senior living where, we've got to have, modified diets. We've got to do some of those things. The state wants to see posted menus in a lot of states. And so how do you do that, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm a proponent of taking a really basic cycle menu and then building around it, right? And using the concept of kitchen design has to be based on I'm running a restaurant. I need to be able to do a la minute, which is in the moment cooking, right? If I
Gotcha.
can do that, I can control food costs. I can more easily train and recruit hospitality and restaurants because that's what they're familiar with. I can make menu changes kind of on the fly because I can offer a number of different things. And, let's just say, oh, well, shoot, I didn't get my order of pork chops for the pork chops. Okay, well, I'll just make that quick menu change. I still already have a bunch of other options. And because I'm cooking everything to order, you know, I've got flexibility, but I can still kind of ride that institutional piece of the puzzle, but blend it in with everything else and create this overall experience for residents that is variety, that's choice, that is high quality because it's produced. Then you can start looking at how you food spend, right? Like if you're buying, you can start buying higher quality ingredients at maybe at a higher price point because you're not making a big batch of something and throwing percent of it away. You're literally using technology and training in your operation to create that experience that controls it all. And so, pushing more and more of that out into the industry. There, like I said, there are operators that are doing a lot of that now.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times, especially the smaller operators that are starting, they're wearing so many hats and they're doing so many things that a lot of times it's quicker and easier to just be like, all right, I'm going to call it a food distributor. They've got a cycle menu, run it. Then I'm just going to make it happen. And so being able to support them will create a program like I just described, makes them more marketable, allows them opportunities to perhaps generate extra revenue. Then it also helps close their back door because these residents aren't complaining about this institutional menu and these institutional food items, but they're getting a high quality, high value product as part of their meal service. And so I think all of those things are important, but it really comes down to that mindset of I want to do it this way versus kind of the way we always.
I think in whole, like that encapsulates the whole, one of the biggest things senior living in general is facing, right? Like doing things, like having these regulations, having these standards, but also not doing things the same way because we need to be adaptable. Like I'm like really grasping onto what you said there about being adaptable, because I think that's what allows you to thrive, particularly, I mean, in any industry, but particularly in senior living right now. And and sort of how I do think it's evolving, and maybe not rapidly or as rapidly as we would hope, but I think if you can be adaptable, you're gonna be successful.
Yeah, no. And I think a lot of times when we talk about like regulations, people get so concerned and so hung up on those. Absolutely, you got to meet the regulations. But I think a lot of times people don't think about the, I don't want to call it the gray area or working around the edges. There's so many things that you can do that aren't a regulatory thing that are actually above and beyond, like the menu, right? Well, you've got to, just an example, you got to offer breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day.
Right.
Well, the you're thinking from a regulatory healthcare kind of mindset, then okay, I got a breakfast meal, I've got a lunch meal, I got a dinner meal. Here's your menu, and we're gonna just make those, right? And so sometimes, I've checked the regulatory box, and now I've moved on to the project. Where if you kind of think, well, the next step of that is I've met the regulations. Well, what do I do to make myself a better brand? How do I want to, impress my residents? How do I, do these kind of little things that are extra touches? Then you can build upon those regulatory items. I think that a lot of times kind of gets people nervous because then it's a little bit more of that outside the box thinking, well, that's now an extra cost. Well, if you do it right, you're going to get more families visiting who might buy meals. Maybe you can offer services for catering, or you can do social events and where charge for those things. And there's taking hospitality and thinking about it strategically versus just kind of operationally, I think changes the ball game for I'm a proponent of the three-legged stool of hospitality, healthcare, and real estate is what senior living is built on, right? Got to
Mm-hmm.
take care of our communities to make the market. Got to take care of our residents from a health wellness perspective. But we got to take care of our residents socially, nutritionally, and really make sure they feel valued, empowered to continue living their life, right? Coming to senior living shouldn't be like the last move, like from a mental standpoint. It should be, I want to make this move, right? It should be, I'm enhancing my life by moving, not kind of, I got to do this. So that's why I'm such a proponent of hospitality has to be strategically at operation.
Yeah, and I think, Aaron, the other really interesting thing you said that I find so fascinating is this idea of really showing the outside world what senior living looks like or can be too, where you're talking about, finding the right moment to host an event where families can show up and experience a good meal. Because if you think about it that way, that's also, in a roundabout way, addressing your occupancy issue too, because
Yeah.
they're going to go to this event, that mom, they just got mom and dad settled here, or mom or dad, or whatever the situation is. And they go and they eat and they're like, oh, wow, like that was really good. Like they're telling their friend, while they're catching up on a phone call or a Zoom
Yeah.
call or something, or a FaceTime, or they're telling a coworker. And that right there, that's so valuable, because maybe that person's friend or coworker is about to experience the same thing. They're shopping for a community, and they're going to trust this trusted person in their life.
Yeah. No, absolutely. A lot of times food gets looked at as the kind of freebie service recovery thing, right? Like, oh, well, somebody wasn't happy with something. Well, let's just give them like a meal ticket. Or let's give the family, hey, come in, we'll buy you lunch or whatever. And it's a quick and easy way. And there are times when that's valuable and needed.
Mm-hmm.
But there's such a missed opportunity. If you think about using food to generate revenue, just that mindset, right? Like you don't necessarily maybe to do that, but if you think about it as if tomorrow I didn't have a great food program and my community was going to shut down, if you think of it that way, that was a question posed a couple weeks back, or a few weeks back, and I just said, think about it that way, right? A restaurant's going to close if food and service isn't any good, and so if you add that to kind of that mindset of, well, I'm going to close the back door. Well, maybe now I can start generating some revenue to add employee perks or increase wages, right? You can use that additional food revenue in a bunch of different ways that doesn't even impact the bottom line. But just using it to enhance what's happening for your community, make it more, valuable in the marketplace is something that I think a lot of operators could benefit.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, and it goes back to exactly what you were saying about that outside the box thinking, right? And that's exactly the kind of disruption that I at least feel, and I believe, Foresight believes is sort of the future of senior living. But Aaron, as we come up on time, my final question, I am so curious to hear. So I recently, it will be coming out in the next few weeks here. I recorded an episode about my 5 biggest kind of lessons I've learned from working in senior living so far. And particularly for me being an outsider in the industry, like, yes, my mom, was a caregiver in senior living for, 20 plus years. But me personally, I'm a creative, and I love the storytelling aspect and helping brands and our partners tell the story of senior living better. But I'm so curious, all your experience, all your years in the industry, what is sort of maybe the biggest 1 or 2 lessons you've learned or walked away from learning?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And there's so many different ways I could probably answer that. I think the first thing is that I think about it as a hospitality professional, right? I refuse to think of myself as just a senior living professional, right? I'm not putting myself just in that box, right? I've always considered myself a hospital professional. Senior living is the biggest opportunity, I think, in hospitality to really truly be that professional, right? Again, it goes back to that what I said earlier, people serving, right? And if you want to have a real impact on a person, it's one thing to bring them their cocktail poolside at a resort, right? Yep, met a need, they're happy. But it's different when you have a senior who has maybe some family issues, they're far away, or they have some health issues they're struggling with. Be able to use what I do to make them happy in a moment, or 2 or 3 times a day, even. I think that's so important. And you to ask me 15 or 17 years ago when I first got in the industry, I would have never thought about like the personal satisfaction. And I was still very much transactional interaction for me. But senior living is much more than that. And so, those personal interactions have really caused me to grow as a person. And I think there are more and more hospitality individuals who are looking for purpose, and senior living lets them do their craft with a purpose.
Yeah, Aaron, thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes, people get into this business, this industry, and this space with the misconception that it is transactional. And honestly, in full transparency, that's okay at first if you don't really have an understanding, right?
Right.
But I think you have to really like understand the fully evolved picture of what you're participating in. And if you can't wrap your head around that picture that it's human to human, then you're missing this whole field and what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely missed the boat if you just look at it exactly. That's the beauty
Yeah.
of senior living, right? It's never really truly going to be transactional. You're going to make a difference in somebody's life, whether you realize it or not. So I think it's so important, such a valuable.
Yeah, 100%. And Aaron, before we close out the episode, you have been such a wonderful guest, such a great resource. I would love for you to share, if someone is interested in learning about Trestle or, connecting with you, where can they find you, please?
Yeah, no. So visit our website, TrestleHospitalityConcepts.com. A lot of information. We've got links to some resources, our podcast that we do, Tips for Trestle. We've got
Nice.
links to those. That's available wherever you podcasts. But then you can find me on LinkedIn, connect there. I'd love to connect with you. I'm always trying to build my network with professionals in the industry, and I just want to figure out how can I help and support, right? And so I'd love for you to reach out and connect.
Fantastic, Aaron. Thank you. And thank you for your time today. This was such an invigorating conversation with me. It's cool to like hear the passion behind what you're doing. And now I'm gonna go eat so much food. So guys, thank you for listening. You can find us anywhere you listen to your podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review, 5 stars only. And thank you again, Aaron, for your time today. And thank you all for listening. We will catch you on the next one. Thanks for listening to Foresight Radio. You can go ahead and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. That's Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and of course, you can listen directly on our website. Thanks for listening and thanks for joining the conversation. We'll talk to you soon.